Hello, and welcome back to another fascinating, amazing, awesome lesson. This time I want to focus on the integumentary system. This is a word uh, you, you never hear in relation to the body because people often overlook this system, although it's the only one we really see, isn't it? I always love making myself laugh. All right, the integumentary system is skin. The largest organ in the body, skin. And here I got a nice blown up picture of skin. Yes, we're going to talk all about skin today. What is the function of skin? You can pause if you want to, or you can keep listening. But skin, believe it or not, has many functions. I hope you like this ugly green background. I felt it brought nothing to the lecture, but I know I couldn't resist today. All right, skin, function. Obviously, it's a protection. It's a first and primary barrier for any kind of microbes or diseases or dirt or chemicals. So you have that protection there. It helps with body temperature regulation through sweating and shivering. Helps with excretion. Some of that sweat release does contain some waste like urea and salts. So hopefully you sweat, you bathe. It contains many nerves, right, for information gathering. So your senses, you get the sense of touch there. You get some thermal receptors, all sorts of pain receptors, all sorts of information coming in from the skin. And then vitamin D, which is an important vitamin to the body, is made in the skin in response to your exposure to sunlight. I got this nice little graphic. I want to point out absorption. I went and found where I got the picture, and it's kind of a moronic website. I like this graphic, but yeah, kind of take absorption out of there. So those are the main functions of the skin and the integumentary system. The structure of skin. We've got the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. And a nice little picture here. The epidermis, the nice top layer, the dermis, the middle layer, and then the hypodermis. We're going to focus primarily on these two layers, the epidermis and the dermis, as we go through. All right, the epidermis. The epidermis is the top layer and primarily made of dead cells. So you have the top layer here is the dead area. And then you do have some living cells near the bottom. And the epidermis, and really it's these dead cells. Right? If you ever got scraped, or maybe you played with some sort of sewing needle, and you can kind of take off those first a little bit of skin without feeling anything, and that's really you're just taking off the epidermis, the top layer here. What happens is these cells at the bottom part, the living part of the epidermis, will divide. And as they divide, they push up, and there's this continual movement up through the epidermis, and eventually, when they reach the top, they are just gone off. They're sloughed off, and you end up with a replacing your skin. I think it's every 4 weeks or so. Maybe it's quicker than that, but an insane quick amount of time that you are producing an entirely new layer. Every 4 to 6 weeks, you have a new layer replacing the old layer. And you're constantly shedding these skin cells, and a lot of what dust is made up of is your dead skin cells. A side note, bloodhounds can track you through these skin cells that are blowing off your top layer of your skin if you're driving in a car. Right? If you're driving in a car, there's enough skin coming out of your windows that a bloodhound could potentially track you. If we were in class, I'd probably spend another 20 minutes talking about this video I saw once, but let's move on. Time's a wasting. All right, within the epidermis, you have pigment, right? And that's produced by a melanocyte. Right? You see this word "cyte" here. It's usually cell, and this prefix melon refers to melanin, which is the skin pigment. A melanocyte is kind of a nerve cell, Right, if you look at a nerve cell here, I think it's a specialized nerve cell, I'm not quite sure. But these cells make melanin, and then they get deposited in these epidermal cells. All right, and that the amount of pigment production in the melanocyte will determine really your skin color. More production, darker color, less production, not so much. And then also it can be stimulated to make pigment through exposure to UV light. Right, you get tanner in the summertime. That UV light hits the epidermis and it stimulates the melanocyte, and it will produce more pigment. So that's kind of interesting that get these melanocytes here. I actually didn't realize that they're nerve cell producing, but it's pretty cool. There's a picture of it. It's pretty sweet. All right, moving on to the dermis. This is where a lot of the action actually happens. And I want to point out the epidermis, this top layer being dead. What will happen is how they die is cells need a continuous supply of blood or oxygen to make ATP. And you can see here it's kind of hard, but you have this branching up of some blood vessels up here, which feed the bottom layer of the epidermis. And as they move up, they lose that kind of that feed of blood, and then they'll just naturally die. All right, anyway, the dermis contains a lot of things, right? You've got blood vessels that go up and extend through it, and they kind of help feed the bottom layer of the epidermis. You've got some nerve endings, you've got glands, you got some sensory receptors, muscles, and hair follicles. Right, and one thing to keep in mind with the two glands I want to talk about and these hair follicles is you're going to have an extension from the dermis all the way up into the epidermis. All right, and you're going to have the glands are going to have little tunnels and tubes that are exposed outside. The hair is going to kind of erupt through the surface, and so even though it starts in the dermis, it does go all the way up through some of these. All right, so you have two types of glands. You have a sweat gland, and so there's a nice little sweat gland. You get this tube that comes up, and you have a sebaceous gland, which will help produce oil. Right, oil's going to help keep your skin from drying out and whatnot. And I think the sebaceous glands are right here, and it helps your skin. And the sweat glands, again, are helping regulate your temperature. When it's cold, when it's warm out, you get activity, they're going to release water, which then gets evaporated, taking thermal energy with it, cooling you down. The muscles here are tiny little muscles, and these are going to be involved in shivering. So when your body temperature drops, as we talked with homeostasis, these muscles will be activated somewhat involuntarily, and as the contraction takes place, your cells are making ATP, generating ATP, and as a byproduct of that, you get heat. So there are the muscles there, and that is a fairly large part of the skin, all that stuff in there. All right, take a look at hair follicles. Hair follicles and hair is an interesting thing. Hair does have some functions, believe it or not. It's not just for looks. Hair helps you, particularly on the head, UV protection, right? Insulation a little bit. I think this more in terms of animals, dogs and cats, more insulated, but it does have that effect. And then for areas like your nose, ears, and eyes, it helps keep dirt out and other things. Maybe some of these allergens like pollen helps collect and filter that out. So hair itself, trying to not to bore you too much with a lot of the details. There's you can look at the whole Wikipedia page in hair if you want. But hair is just cells, dead cells that have been filled with keratin, which is a kind of a tough protein. It's also the substance that your nails are made out of. So you have these hair follicles, and they grow out, and that's just really kind of these dead cells filled with keratin. Hair color comes from, again, it's a pigment like melanin, and there are two types that I saw. One that's kind of related to brown and black, and one that's related to red. And then blonde hair is just a lack of pigmentation. Like they have just a less production of the pigment than others, resulting in the lighter color. So I thought that was pretty sweet. And then finally, the bottom layer is the hypodermis. The hypodermis is a layer of fat underneath the two, and it's just really a layer of fat. Hypodermis, epidermis, dermis, hypodermis. That's the skin. I don't think I have anything else. Kind of review if you want. Maybe I bored you and you want to go away. I don't know. But yeah, the skin's pretty cool. Cooler than maybe you give it credit for. It's there holding everything in, keeping you safe, keeping bad things out, warning you in case that you have put your hand on the hot stove. It'll warn you those nerve endings and in conjunction with the nervous system. But that's all for me today. Enjoy.